History laid the foundation
that informs our conversation. Welcome to the classroom.
From the church to the streets, and even in the suites, and all around the world. I'm gonna keep it real in the classroom. Fannie Lou's classroom. Fannie Lou's classroom. Fannie Lou's classroom.
Good afternoon and welcome to season 3 of Fannie Lou's Classroom. We are back and super excited. Brooke, can we get a hand clap? We're super excited to be here. Thank you so much for tuning in. And of course, if you know someone who's missing this live noon broadcast, we will rebroadcast today's episode at 7 o'clock p.m. Central Standard Time. So we're super excited. We had some developments to happen since season 2. The first one is you can now catch us on other platforms. You can now find us on Amazon Music, Spotify, and various streaming platforms where you can find all of your other favorite podcasts. And another development that we are still super excited about right here at Princeton U.S. and in the Dallas area is that our senior pastor, the Reverend Dr. Frederick Douglass Haynes III, was elevated to the position of President and CEO of Rainbow Push Coalition, where he now stands on the shoulders of Reverend Jesse Lewis Jackson. So we're excited to support him and see how he's going to expand and build the capacity of Rainbow Push, and we need that in the day and time that we are in. So for such a time as this, he has been called to such an elevated position because we know there's so much work that needs to be done as we still strive to create what Dr. King called the beloved community, where all of God's children have access to life-giving, life-sustaining resources. And we join Dr. Haynes in this work as we try to tear down systems, institutions that rob people of an abundant life. So let's give it up for Dr. Haynes one more time as new president, CEO of Rainbow Push. And listen, we got to pray for our pastor and his entire family because he doesn't do this alone. They too are a part of this elevation, and he's still pastoring Friendship West Baptist Church right here in Dallas, Texas. So he's pulling 2 full-time jobs that require a lot of his energy, and so we're just here to support him. We hope you do too, and you can even drop a little encouraging word for him in the chat or join us on Sunday morning for worship and do it there as well. So check it out. You know, we could not have this amazing podcast without a fabulous team. So I first got to give a shout out to Roche and Brooke, who are audio engineers. And as y'all know, Brooke held it down all by herself in season 2. Brooke, you holding it down in season 3 by yourself too?
Yes, ma'am.
Bam, there it is. So that's our audio engineer. So she's doing all the amazing work to make this look good and sound good across our social media platforms. And of course, I couldn't do this without Cheryl and Shanika, who serve as well. We all have multiple roles. We all serve as executive producer, content creator. So we all work together to make this happen. And so look, you can join our team. We would love to have you. Whatever skill set you have, I promise you we can use it. You like the research? We need that. You good at social media? We need that. You're super creative to come up with titles, YouTube hashtags, anything. We need you. I promise you, whatever you have, we need. You know how to raise money? We need that too, because you know ministry does cost, and so we want to be able to bring you the best, guests that we have, and we'll also make sure we're able to give you the best of what we have to offer by way of content. So wanted to get that out of the way, but look, I'm even more excited about the conversation we're going to have on today. And really it's an extension of a conversation we started in season 2 with Reverend Dameon Madison and Reverend Dr. David Malcolm McGruder, where we talked about it takes two. How can black women and black men beyond, having more of a familiar or just like each other, not even romantically, right? We talked about the ways in which we seem to be at war. And of course, notwithstanding, we know there's some amazing, healthy, beautiful black love out there, but we got to deal with where it's not beautiful, healthy, and loving, right? So we started having that conversation. I believe it led itself to a larger conversation around just how it was rooted in how we even see each other and how we're not connected to our African identity and the necessity of being connected to our African identity. So that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to expand that and talk about how we strengthen the bonds, right, across the African diaspora. Because I contend that we are more alike than we are different.
Oh, absolutely.
So we'll do some conversation around how we can detox, right, from a particular worldview that has put us in that position to kind of maybe not so much think positive about one another. So we'll kind of dig into that and some other fun conversation as well. So as y'all know, this is a very laid back conversation where we try to have conversations around the intersection of faith, race, and politics. And so we try to have serious conversations, but just do it in a way that's very conversational, right? So we'll be try to do that as much as possible because we're going to have two scholars on the show today. So you just never know which way that is going to go. But I do want to say this. As we have this conversation around the African diaspora, we're clear that this has to be a nuanced conversation. We know so in the future, as we speak about this throughout the show, if we say Africans and we make it more broad, we know that, who came over on those slave ships was not just one particular type of African, right? We know we have various tribes, nations, multiple languages, cultures, et cetera, et cetera. So we know that. So we want to say that up front, that we understand that. But for the sake of continuity, we know there's some commonalities, right? Where they all still believe there is one supreme being. It may have been called Odemare in Yoruba, something else in Dogon for these so we know that. So we just want to make sure. I want to put that out there because I know somebody like, no, you have this. We know it's nuance. We know. And identity becomes even more layered as the centuries go by, right? So I just wanted to say that before we got started to make sure I have that out of the way. So when we think about that, and just kind of in my own travels and interactions with people in conversation, I believe we have to reach out to Africa, and Africa has to reach out to us. We have to reach out to the other Americas and the Caribbean, and they have to reach out to us. Because like I said, I think we definitely have more in common than we are different. And so how do we kind of find those commonalities and we thrive in that space? And I think it's highly possible. And I know you have some examples of the ways you've experienced that yourself. So I kind of already introduced you. You've been here before, but let me go ahead and introduce you and Pastor McGruder again. And y'all won't see Pastor McGruder, so if I don't turn to him and talk to him, don't think I'm ignoring him. He's going to join us a little later on. He's going to slide into the room at some point. But let me go ahead and at least give a little introduction for those who may not know who either one of our guests are. Pastor Madison, Dameon E. Madison, is affectionately known as Pastor D, a native of Chicago, and has possessed a heart for humanity and social change for as long as he can remember. We're about the same age, so that's a long time. However, having worked with both the church and nonprofit arenas, he is committed to the community engagement and development, life transformation, organizational development and administration, and individual education and empowerment, concerned with bridging the gap between the intellect and inspiration, cultural awareness and social formation, passion, and community problem solving. Pastor Madison is the principal at DEM Ministries and Strategic Solutions and founder and pastor of Village at the Life Church, the Life Community Fellowship Church. He additionally serves as the project manager for the Better Together initiative at the Martin Luther King Center for Nonviolent Social Change in Atlanta, Georgia, a project designed to reconnect and empower the faith community to engage in social change or social work. Social change and social work, right? Then we have, who will join us momentarily, is the Reverend Dr. David Malcolm McGruder. He's a minister, educator, organizer who hails from Kansas City, Kansas. His ministry, professional, and community service experience includes work with the Brisbane Institute of Political Science and the Martin Luther King Jr. International Chapel at Morehouse College, and some many other ways in which he's engaged in organizing and community service experience. Dr. McGruder is a graduate of Morehouse College with a BA in Political Science and Philosophy in Atlanta, Georgia, where he was awarded the Martin Luther King Jr. Scholarship and Prize and the Princeton Theological Seminary MDill Theological and Politics and Ethics, where he was awarded the Aaron E. Gass Prize in Urban Ministry. He has completed his PhD in History, Religion, and International Relations from the Wilson College at the University of Cambridge in the UK. He currently serves as the executive pastor here at Friendship West Baptist Church, a ministry with a global impact, and a course that is led by our amazing pastor, the Reverend Dr. Frederick D. Haynes III. So welcome, Reverend Madison, back to the show, and in advance, welcome and believing that Reverend Dr. David Malcolm McGruder will be joining us momentarily.
Right.
So welcome. You say anything before I jump in?
Oh, no, I'm happy to be here. Thank you so much for having me again.
Yes.
I appreciate it.
Yes. So I want to kind of start this as a way to kind of frame the conversation. I want to read the first stanza of Conte Cullen's Heritage, his poem Heritage, which I believe he wrote in 1922, but it was published in 1925. So that kind of gives us an idea of
Context. Yeah.
Right. So what is Africa to me? Copper sun or scarlet sea? Jungle star or jungle track? Strong bronze men or regal black? Women from whose loins I sprang when the birds of Eden sang. 3 centuries removed from the scenes his father loved. Spicy grove, cinnamon tree. What is Africa to me? And so, of course, this goes on. Lengthy poem, but an amazing poem. And you just kind of see how, for me at least, we know poetry is how you write our interpretation, et cetera, right? But for me, it's a person he's speaking of, I'm going to say who lives in America, who something internally is calling him to Africa. The sights and the sounds are calling him. But at the same time, he's in America dealing with the identity that he has grown into by living in America that's shaped and framed, right, by systems, institutions undergirded by white supremacy, right? So it's this, I feel like in this point, this person's going back and forth like, Africa, I feel it, I hear it, but it's always distant. It's over there somewhere. And so I think it's a poem that also is calling us to, right, think about what it means to connect to Africa and what does it mean for our cultural identity, really identity shaping and forming. And so I think that's what it beckons us to do in a real sense. And that's what we want to talk about.
Yeah, as you were reading, and just on the context, 1920s, right? And he's writing about a place that is vehemently demonized at that time, right? And it's also a place that is still demonized to this day. But here he is writing, and I had to close my eyes and just listen to what you're saying, because he's still finding beauty in what has been demonized. Like there's something intrinsically in him that's reminding him and informing him that where you come from is a beautiful place.
Yes.
That you come from a place of beauty, of rest, even, a place of peace, even. And so, but to be able to write that where there is no peace, to be able to pen that in a context where you're being told you are worthless and you're meaningless, it says a whole lot about the person he was and what was living and speaking and breathing within him, to inform him that he was better than what he was told he was.
Right.
So that is a huge connection point that I think we can begin from.
Right.
Is that there is something in us that beckons us back home.
And I like that because in the year of our Lord 2023, there are many of us who still have a disdain for Africa, Africa's spiritual practices, culture, language, identity. And to your point, it is because of the way that Africa has been pictured as the dark continent, uncivilized, has nothing to offer the world, right? And so I think that's why we have to, first of all, detox, and we have to get, like, psychologically, I'm talking, because it's, as Bobby Wright says, cement aside how our minds have been taken over. We have to detox from that to understand, to your point, the beauty of what it is. And I think in this year, now that was 1920s, he didn't have social media. No. And he wasn't catching flights like you can catch flights now.
Right.
Where you can, so we know better. We've seen what's in Africa, right? Even if you haven't been, you now see more positive images that you can lean into. So what is it about? So I guess let's start from the beginning, right? Let's talk about the dispersion, the scattering of Africans throughout the Americas and the Caribbean. Because we talked about strengthening the bonds in the African diaspora, because we're not the only ones who were impacted by the suffering or the scattering. It's the way in which Europeans began to dominate and colonize the world. They then also colonized world history.
Right.
So world history was colonized, and because of that, they became the subjects and we became the objects. And for a lot of us, we have not moved beyond being the objects, or we're running from that because that's all we can connect to. So let's start with the first question to kind of get us rolling here. Talk to us about, because I don't want to assume that people know this. I think we have to talk about the Mai Alpha in order to get to the necessity of reclaiming.
Right.
So talk to us about what was this dispersion? What is the Mai Alpha, and why is it important for us to know what it is?
Well, I think that, and I want to kind of begin where you started. We have to first recognize that this isn't isolated just to North America.
Right.
It's not isolated just to us and our cousins, right?
Right.
This was a global effort to literally dehumanize and deconstruct an entire culture of people.
Right.
I think we have to begin with that framework, that this was not just an aberration of history. This wasn't just something that just it wasn't a blip on the calendar. This was a masterful, malevolent, structured, systematized movement to dehumanize, commodify an entire people. So let's just start there, right? And so when you look at that, you have this disruption of culture, disruption of family, disruption of economy, disruption of humanity, and then to push it further, disruption of faith and spirituality. And so you had this entire attack on existence of peoples from various nations. And so, again, and I love how you open it up by making sure that we realize that this is an African continental context, right? Not just a country, because Africa is a continent. So I think, I think we got to begin there academically, that first of all, Africa, it's not a country, it's a continent that's made up of multiple countries, which means you have multiple, again, cultures and people and diversity and just ways of living and existing. And all of that was disruptive for the sole purpose of commodification of humanity.
Right.
And so in doing that and coming to the Americas, again, North America, South America, again,
right.
I mean, it's spread. And we can't leave out Europe either.
True.
Right?
True.
Because so we have these peoples who are spread out across these spaces, who don't know each other, who have been disrupted from their, from their faith, from their family, their economy, their humanity, and now you're placed and dropped somewhere, and you're forced to survive, and then you're being fed and indoctrinated in a way to dehumanize you and keep you detached from who you were. And here we are in 2023, and we are still living the effects of that disruption.
Right. So talk a little bit about what are some of the manifestations, right, of this? Because we're talking, to your point, centuries later. And to your point, I'm glad you brought up don't leave out Europe, because everywhere you go, you're going to find we were there.
Absolutely.
When I was, I don't know where, I was somewhere out of the country, and it was a black country, right? And there was a white man from Sweden, I believe. He was, as some of them do, all in ear hustling. He was in our conversation, and he's like, "Oh, you're American?" I was like, "Yeah." And we're telling him why we were there, what we were doing. He said, "Have you ever thought of doing this and going to Europe to visit?" I said, "Well, number one, we've visited Europe before." He made your assumption is we haven't been. Right. We only know certain places. But then we said, if we go, we're going to look for the black people who were there. And he just started turning red, right? Because he was like, because his question to us, are we exploring European culture?
Right.
So to your point, right, even when you can be in the blackest place outside of America, and the way in which he entered that conversation was still centered on Europe. And so, to your point, so yes, we got to think about Europe too, right? Yeah. But I think we know the vast majority of those who came through the European slave trade, I don't even call it the Atlantic slave trade, that ocean didn't enslave nobody. The Europeans did, right? Exactly. So I think going through, and the majority going to South America. Right. Brazil in particular. So talk to us a little bit about, that's the dispersion, that's the Mai Alpha, that's our great travail, the great suffering that we went through this odd number of years of being traded as a commodity. So what are some of the manifestations you would say we see as vestiges of enslavement and colonization that allows us, some of us, not all of us, right? Some of us take great pride in who we are. We have no quarrels about identifying as being African, but a lot of us do. In fact, some of us don't even want to be called African American anymore, or Black. Right. I'm Christian, or I'm a human. But you live in a world constructed by race, tied to identity. So talk to us a little bit about what, because we're having this conversation, we're saying some of us just have a negative view of ourselves, which in turn makes us have a negative view of one another, which lends itself to why we can't have healthy relationships. So how do you see the ways that's manifested? Right.
Well, so you mentioned, you asked about the vestiges, right? And I think one of the things that I think a good benchmark is that we tend to center whiteness. That is, I think that will probably be if I had a thesis to argue with, it would be, that we, as a result of, the Ma'afa, as a result of the Great Disruption, we have been indoctrinated and we've adopted this idea that whiteness has to be centered. And so we kind of begin from that point. We begin from white supremacy and don't even realize it. And so everything that how we measure, how we live, how we think, how we dress, how we do our hair, how we worship, how we engage other belief systems, all begins from the lens of centering whiteness and Europeanization. And so I think that is a huge, wound, if you will, from slavery and the disruption that has gone unhealed. Is that we center, it's funny, I was in a meeting last week, actually, and we were amongst some faith leaders, and we were talking and wrestling with this idea of, what are the issues we see in society that are disruptors to the beloved community? What are the disruptors to us being able to exist and be humanity together? And so, despite all the data, all the facts that showed that grew out of that conversation, there was still a few at that table who said that's not true, and it wasn't true. Because they were centering whiteness and the white experience, even though they were African American. And so, because they begin their lens from whiteness, and then to your point, you hear phrases like, "Well, I'm not a Black Christian. I'm a Christian who happens to be Black." There is this constant move to remove myself from any idea of Africanity, any idea of Blackness, because I have to center myself in a European context in where whiteness is centered, and I divorce myself from my culture, my thinking, my thought system, and even my faith system. Because if we look at African spirituality, we have more touches there.
Right. That's right.
Then we can, even the Black church didn't even realize the way we worship is a direct depiction of African spirituality. The way our praise breaks is a perfect depiction of African spirituality. I mean, the way we scream, shout, the way we view God.
The ring shout.
The ring shout. Yes, absolutely.
We think it's so. So let's stay there, because I think these are some of the ways we can strengthen the bonds, right? By finding the commonality. So, just a story. So, because it could be, and see, here's the other thing. Really saying religion for Africans is really a Western construct too.
Oh yeah,
because religion is not something you practice; it's something to be lived out.
That's right. Who you are
is so much of who you are. God is not there. God is in everything and everywhere, which is why we have a different relationship with ecology, with animals. We can go to Haiti, how, the revolt, how that happened, right? But let me leave that over there. We'll come back to it. But I want to look at the common. So, quick story. When I was in Salvador Bahia a few weeks ago, we went to the memorial of the Bayanas.
Wait, how come you didn't invite me?
It was a cultural immersion for women to talk to Afro-Brazilian women.
I guess. Okay. All right.
So, So we went to the memorial of the Bayanas, right? So as we were walking through, they were giving us the history of who the Bayanas were, where they came from. So they come from women who were enslaved, but during enslavement, they would take like the leftover material from the European women, create their own dress and attire, take that to the market, upsell it, take the extra proceeds and hide them in their bosom. And everybody in that circle said, my grandma, that's where she put her money. See, some stuff I think is purely African and in our DNA. And that's, I mean, it's small things like, nobody talk. I'm pretty sure my grandmother did not know that women in Salvador Bahia would hide money in their book. I'm pretty sure about it. I feel comfortable saying she didn't know that. Right. And so as we moved throughout, like another example, we went to a mother, she was about 95. She was in one of the tahinas, right, where they practice, candomblé, which is obviously, the derivative of Yoruba religion, like we did in America, how we kind of crafted our form of Christianity, right? And so she said, she was giving us a story about how you use looks to communicate. Because she was saying back, at some point when you were around white folks, you couldn't say what you wanted to say. She talked about how she took her glasses off and she said, if I did this, you knew what that meant. I say, we understand, just things that, black folks, we'll sit across the room at a meeting and we'll give each other a certain look and we already know what that means, right? So I'm just saying there's some that we're more alike than different, and we can't allow things like skin color, hair texture, where you're from, to be the division, because Dr. John Henry Clark said the only difference between all of us is a boat stop. That the boat didn't drop off, Brazilians. It didn't drop off Haitians. It didn't drop off, Dominicans, Puerto Rican. It dropped off Africans. Right. And so, and I know over time, obviously we all create these unique cultures, but how do we take that and use that to really build and see ourselves as more alike than different, and not be ashamed and not continue to have that, to your point, like this, deeply embedded in our psyche that we are inherently, something is wrong with us inherently. And then we have to hide that in meetings and in conversations. I mean, we still catch flack because we have the Ankh inscribed on the pews and in the pulpit.
It's funny you mentioned that. So at my church, we went through this huge restructuring. And so part of our rebranding, we added the Ankh to our branding. So we added the Ankh, and then our colors, we added the Pan-African colors to the Ankh as well. So, now mind you, I'm in North Texas. I'm in the Plano area.
Yes.
Yes. So, but what was interesting though is when we were going through our marketing and kind of reviewing the images and logos and stuff, and so my team even began to ask questions. Well, why do we have why this? Why not the cross? I said, well, that is a cross. And but just but I had to pause and take time to teach the history of the Ankh and unpack what it actually represents and the genesis of even what we call our Christian faith. Because I assumed, even though I've been preaching, they've been around me for a while, they know me, I assumed they understood and they got it, they knew, right? They didn't, because academically, when you look at America, we are taught to demonize everything that's tied to blackness. And then to make it worse, the church demonizes everything that's tied to blackness. So we have this context where we don't know who we are because we've been taught to hate and dislike who we are. So before we even get to the point of having that reconnection, we have to have a re-education point. Where we have some conversations about, this is who you are. This is where you come from. This is why you do what you do. This is why you sing the way you sing. It's, the way you worship is because you have an intricate, deep connection to a God that brought our people through slavery, through Jim Crow, and we worship. It's funny, you got some churches in here, God, you're wonderful. God, you're great. Because you ain't, but for us, when we worship, when we sing, there's this deep experience, because we knew that God was all that we had. But we also have this connection with God because we see God in everything. Everything. And so I think we got, but to be more pointed, I think we have to begin with a point of education, first of all, where the Black church specifically has got to be able to have a conversation and not be ashamed and be Black. We have to stop that and stop hiding ourselves behind this Europeanized, Americanized theology and be okay with being who we are.
Right. And I think, and I hear what you're saying, that before we can reconnect, we have to do the education. But I would submit that we have to do the both and. Right? You know what I mean? Yeah. Just finding what, because sometimes I can connect better, maybe not going through hearing it, but experiencing it, right? It is also, I like how just different ways we can say, you do this, let me tell you how that's purely African. So you don't want to be there, but you are that inherently. So one time I went back to Alabama to put flowers on my father's grave and my uncle's grave. They died like 2 months apart. And so the one time we went, we had to go get fresh flowers, right? And so when I got there, I looked around and I could tell my cousins had been there because it was some Miller Lite and it was like beer cans, right, and bottles. But I knew they had been there and had poured out beer. Because they used to sit with my father and my uncle. That's what they did with all the boys in the family. Right. And not understand when you pour that out, that you were pouring libations. You were saying that there is a visible world and an invisible world, that we have a linear world and a non-linear world, and that our ancestors are always present and with us. But to know that means, so when I do that, that's not something we came up with over on the street. Right. This is something inherently who I am. So when you demonize African ways of being, ways of knowing, you're really you're constantly demonizing yourself, but you're doing the practices that are done already. That, to your point, I think they're inherited in, because where'd that come from? Right. And I think that's part of how we use things like that to teach. It's a teaching too, but it's how to connect this regular everyday occurrence is what we do. My grandmother used to chop up the ground around the house before it was thunder. If a storm was coming, she'd chop up the ground. Now, I didn't know till, maybe 2008 when Dr. Wright was here doing the African American Heritage Lecture Series. And he talked about Shango, the god of thunder and lightning. And so she was chopping. Now, I bet she probably heard it, but it was passed down from her mother, et cetera. But I was like, well, that's what she did. She chopped up the ground around the house. This is a way of saying don't let the lightning strike the house, right? So to your point, it's the education, but it's just showing the ways that we're already inherently connected already. And I know when I was in Brazil, of course, I'm walking around and they just start talking to me. I'm like, no hablo Portuguese. I don't speak. And they're like, oh, you American? I'm like, yeah. But that's what I mean by we're the only ones who are making all these distinctions. I'm this, I'm that. And it's okay to make a distinction, to be proud to be, the culture that you're raised up in, but it don't make it a division. Right. And we see that very distinctly on Hispaniola. Oh, yeah. Oh, yes. How the Dominicans view the Haitians. Yes. More so, right? In the way in which they have been cruel by way of murdering and not allowing them to get across the border. And Haitians who were born in Dominican trying to put them out. They know nothing about Haiti. Right. But it's this idea of what we think about Haitians and what we've been taught, and how Dominicans lean more into being European. Right. Well, I think that when you get there, you start to see the effects, or you can see in Living Color, what Paula Freire was writing about in Pedagogy of the Press. Yes. We begin to adopt this idea of being the oppressor. That's right. Because that's how we see strength. That's how we see power. That's right. Because we have been so indoctrinated with Europeanization and colonization, and so we begin to view ourselves and others through that lens, right? And so, but we cannot we can't give a pass to the faith community either, right? On how we reinforce that. And in particular, Haiti, the way that we have demonized what Haiti was able to accomplish in creating their own nation by pushing back against white supremacy. pushing back against white supremacy, but also the strength, right? Because they weren't a great military nation.
No.
So it's the strength, but it's the faith. They had the ceremony down in that cave, right? Boukman and Fatima went down there. A woman, Cecile Futiman, and Duddy Boukman went down in that cave. They first had a religious ceremony. They picked them herbs from the ground, rubbed them herbs on themselves, and we saw what happened.
And the depiction of that is what?
Oh yeah, demonic
witchcraft. That was and so we've adopted that.
Yeah.
Right? And it's like, wait a minute. We demonize anything and everything that's not Americanized, Europeanized Christianity.
Right. And that is the problem. And I think that's the root that has to be torn up and uprooted. But, and to your point, it happens here.
Oh, yeah.
In terms of, so I look at, when we were in Salvador Bahia, and the sister's name escapes me, but while we were there, she was assassinated. And she was for them, for those who practice candomblé, she was the one who stood up for their rights to keep practicing candomblé, because the government is trying to shut that down. They are trying to get them to be Catholic, right? And so you think about here, a Friendship West,
right,
who has a justice focus, who speaks truth to power, who views the Bible, the hermeneutic, right, from the bottom up, right? In the way, because churches like ours get demonized. We're always getting hate mail, threatening this and that and the other, right? Because to your point, you have to center the whiteness, and when you push back against that, that is going to be a problem for the dominant culture.
Oh, absolutely.
And to your point, that comes in the form of black folks, white folks, all kind of folks, right? So I think that is but I think that is the way in which we need to say, hey, listen, we're more alike than we are different. The same white dominating system is the world over. We're all impacted by it. And the sooner we can realize to pull this together and have strength in numbers, that's what they're afraid of. That's why when you say Pan-African movement, that's why people get shaky and scary. Because they know what that means when you say Pan-African. And I always say the Slam and Bama, and we could use the brother as a metaphor, and what happened, the white folks who attacked him, look at the systems and institutions that are impacting black people. Let's attack it like that from a global standpoint, because that's what's killing us faster than police brutality, right?
Absolutely.
The structural violence that takes place. And so I'm wondering let's talk to the church. Now let's talk about the black church in particular. I'm talking about the black church born in the hush harvest, right? As we always, it was mentioned last night in a sermon too, or in a conversation that was last night, that we distinguish between churches with black people and the black church. So I think we have a role to play in how we strengthen those bonds. To your point, how we can we should use our platform to do more, to have a reach out, to make sure that we reclaim our African identity and put it where it needs to be, which is we are the cradle of civilization. That we had, not only did we knew we had the skill sets, because they went to certain places to get those who could harvest rice, who could do different, so they knew what they were doing when they went and got the particular people. So how do we begin to do that? What are some practical ways the black church can help strengthen the bonds across the African diaspora, even here in America, but across the Americas and the Caribbean?
Right. I think one of the things that, is a very foundational, basic thing that we could do is, and I say this for clergy in particular, is to educate ourselves on accurate history. And I say accurate history because we're living in a time now where there is a move to really reorient and be very ahistorical on how we see even America. And so how we see ourselves. And so I think as a result of that, it also shows about how we even see the emanation of the black church as a result of that. So we got to look at how, again, learning accurate history is a huge one big piece. But to go further, I think we have to begin to look at the sacred text very differently. We, in Americanized churches, and even those who are, who identify as black churches, tend to look at the Bible as if it is a Europeanized American work.
So let's stop there. Because I think, to your point, the first European worldview, because it's not a European book.
And the text itself is very communal.
Right.
You cannot read past that, right? When you look at pieces like, again, it's East Africa. You have Egypt mentioned. You have the Ethiopian eunuch. You cannot. There's no way to read the text and not see it. So I think we have to be given honor and lift up the fact that this sacred text is germane to our people, and we have to begin to see ourselves in the text as well. So I think that's a huge point. And so, for example, and also be willing to be open, and to not demonize the fact that our people were very syncretic, and so we have to stop demonizing that idea because, for example, you hear this language about demonizing, honoring our ancestors and all that, but you have Hebrews that says, well, we have a cloud of witnesses who are cheering us on. Well, what's that? Those are ancestors. So we have to begin to read the text very differently and recognize that, okay, that's, one of the things I did, I started to review the Ethiopian Coptic Bible. And I started from there and walking my team through it as well. And just to really to see the openness and willingness to embrace self, because you're seeing the text from a very different perspective,
right?
Because we have been taught, and then that this was a European text that we were given. We came here with this, and so if we understood that history and see the connection point, and the Black church begins to adopt that cultural context, that mindset, that ethos, if you will, right? We have to begin to function from that perspective and detach ourselves from this idea and the indoctrination of centering whiteness and everything. Let's center self in it first.
Yeah, and to your point, and it's also this idea of we have our Bible, but we have a God beyond the text.
Right.
And so, because I think we have to, if we're going to do this where we strengthen this bond throughout the diaspora, we have to make space and room for, right, other ways in which people view God and understand who God is.
Absolutely.
Without thinking that's gonna, that means I'm not Christian anymore. But that's what happens.
It does.
Anything outside of this very structured way of viewing this Bible, anything outside of that is going to be demonized because we don't know about it. We demonize what we don't know.
Yeah.
And so, or we've been told to demonize. And so you see that in Thornton's text when he talks about Africa and Africans who shaped the Atlantic world. I think it's like from the 1400s to 16 something or other. And he talked about when the Europeans first came, it was an exchange of understanding who God was, but it wasn't until they wanted to take over, to dominate, is when they canonized the book. Like, these are the books. Anything outside of this is going to be evil and it's not of God. And we have to let go of that because that is what we're doing.
Oh, yeah. 100%.
And I think, and for me, I just know I've been some places where I met people and they were not Christian, but you couldn't tell me they didn't know who God was, right? And so we got to be able to broaden make the table larger for people to come and not feel threatened by that.
Yeah.
And that the Bible is a sacred text, but there are other sacred texts.
Absolutely.
Because it's the Europeans who said, well, this go and this this stays and this goes. And this idea, if we understand, and we believe this as Black folks, or really anybody who preaches, if you preach every Sunday, you believe in a God of revelations. You believe in a God that's constantly revealing. You're moving between the invisible and the invisible world. You're getting revelation. So if that's the case, it can't just be tied to what you just read and you make it to say what you want it to say.
Right.
Or the slave Bible we often talk about.
Right.
Where they snatched all that stuff out that would make you think about, running away. Would think you about like rebelling, liberation, freedom.
Yeah.
So we have to understand that we have to reclaim, if not return to, and reclaim in order to renew and to move forward with finding these commonalities and using those that makes us stronger, as opposed to these few little things that are really manufactured to divide us. I know even we talk about this. Now, this did blow me away in Brazil. As I sat with several people, I got lost in how people identify. Mm-hmm. So I seen pictures when you used to have hair. Mm-hmm. So based on your hair texture and your skin tone, you would be considered one thing. Mm-hmm. So Brooke would be considered something else. But if Brooke's skin tone is the way it is, but her hair was straight, she would be considered something. And this is how they're ordering, their world. I'm like, this is crazy, right? Because the Europeans don't care about all this ordering. Mm-hmm. Now, you know how just like in America, they have preferences. Sometimes they prefer like maybe an ambiguous person that you really can't tell they're black, or they may be lighter skin. But for them, you're still black. Yeah. And I think that is one of the vestiges of colonization, that we go through these nuances of hair and what shade are you, and you can buy your way out of a particular station in life if you marry this kind. Like, to me, those are some of the things we have to call out, and we have to be honest about those, like colorism. We don't talk about as much as we should, but it's very real. Mm-hmm. And that too is very deeply embedded in our community. Oh yes. And so we also have some internal work, because strengthening the bonds is not just tearing down and pushing back against a Eurocentric worldview, but it's also how we need to look internally at the ways in which we are destroying one another every day. And little kids, I've seen little young girls who already have an identity crisis. I don't know if you saw this on Instagram. It was a little girl, I don't know, maybe she was 8, maybe a little younger, but she was getting her hair done. Mm-hmm. So the woman's combing her hair, and she just blurts out, "I'm ugly." Mm-hmm. So the woman stopped doing. She said, "What did you just say?" And she repeated it, and the little girl just lost it. It's like she was almost inconsolable. Mm-hmm. And I said, at that age, that's probably some grown folk talking about her hair and her skin. Mm-hmm. And so I'm saying that's the kind of stuff we have to work on internally, so that across the diaspora, we're not making those distinctions. Right.
Man, okay. There's a whole lot that you just kind of dropped on us. But I want to start from the Bible piece. Yes. And I think that's a whole discussion within itself. Right. Because we have to wrestle with our theology in a huge way. And, and so, and with that is this idea that I think that the church has to wrestle with and be okay with being open and honest about the text. Mm-hmm. The fact that the Bible as we know it was canonized 1,000 years post Jesus. Let's just start there, right? And so what did people do in that time frame from Jesus to the actual canonized text? There was a personal experience with God that we had. We got to be very honest with that. We have to, and then you mentioned the slave Bible, right? We got to be very honest about it. The Bible, yes, it has been manipulated. I mean, I know we want to honor it. It's sacred. We preach from it, but we have to be very honest. The Bible has been manipulated, and it was been adjusted and used to commodify and dehumanize God's creation. Right. We have to be very honest with that. It's okay, because again, slave Bible, it removed the entire book of Psalms. The entire book of Exodus. Right. So there was no mention of freedom or liberation at all, because what? They wanted to make sure that you were subjugated and oppressed and controlled. And so we had to be very honest with that. To go a step further, we're reading a text that is, especially in the New Testament, right? We're reading, Greek and Latin about a Jesus who was a Palestinian Jew. Right. Who spoke Aramaic, who quoted Hebrew. Right. Right. So the interplay of languages and history and context, we have to be very honest about that. And then how we nuance that and work with that will help us see ourselves better if we were honest about the text and how we teach it and use it. So I think that's one piece where we got to be okay with wrestling with. Mm-hmm. And yes, I may be a pastor, I'm called. Yes, all that, but I'm honest about the text that we're working with. Right. And that's okay. Right. Because it doesn't make God any less God. That's right. God is still God. In fact, you're recovering. Yes. Right. It's the process of recovering. I always the academic exercise is not where the black folks in the Bible. It's where the white people in the Bible. Right.
You know what I mean? If you're going to talk about if you digging, that's what you need to dig for.
Right.
And so I think, to your point, we have to be okay. And it doesn't, and I think that's what people are probably maybe push back, is they're thinking, oh, this is a sacred text. No, we got to talk about, because really what you just laid out so brilliantly, what you reading is not even, you're not even reading in Aramaic. Because like when you were in I'm like, this is Greek?
Yeah.
Now, how is that? Well, okay, let's go with it, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's what's important. I think that is a way that's one way of strengthening it with ourselves here in America, right? To your point, right? How do we do that so that when we go outside of here, we know when I see you somewhere else in another country, I don't go to that country and just consume.
Right.
Like, I go to this country, understand there's a particular history here. If you practice this particular religion, this is why you do it. Right. Here's where I see we are in alignment. I mean, I went to some services in Bahia, in Salvador in particular, and I was like, seems familiar to me. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean?
Very much so.
Very, very familiar. So it's how do you free yourself up? And we can only do that, to your point, of being intentional about how we approach text, how we preach text, and not using it as an opium for the people, which is a lot of times what we find. And what people, sometimes they come for that because all week they've been beat up, the microaggressions, they tired.
Yeah.
So they want to feel comfortable. It's like, but you don't understand. It's really not equipping you to deal with that. Because, then you're going, because that got to beat you down eventually. Mm-hmm. The more that's pushed into you, the more you have to deal with it, the stress levels. Mm-hmm. Which is probably why we got more hypertension than anybody else.
Right.
Because we got to deal with all these stressors that other people don't have to deal with.
Right.
So, I thank you for that. Now, what were you going to say next?
No.
The Bible was first. You was going to go somewhere else.
And I just wanted to go, the whole idea of colorism and it's funny, and my wife may get mad at me for saying this, but I'm going to bring it up anyway. I love you. But my wife and I were talking one day, and she kind of been with me on this journey, kind of how I had to kind of reorder the church and just really, and so she kind of watched me in this process. And my wife decided, she locked her hair about 3 years ago. And my wife works in corporate America. Mm-hmm. And my wife is dark skinned. I love black sisters. I love, her. So yeah, I like chocolate.
But that deserves come on.
So I'm just saying. But we were talking, and she just decided to kind of be open with me about her experience with being dark skinned, locking her hair, and being in corporate America. And now, mind you, now she's married to me. I'm, her friends call me, light skinned Malcolm X. And so, because I feel like the older I get, the black I get. I don't know why, but there it is. But anyway, so
liberate. It's called liberation.
Absolutely. And but she was saying she began to share with me that even though that was something that she wanted to do, it gave her peace to lock her hair. It gave her, but she still wrestled with the comfort in being dark skinned, having locked hair in corporate America, right? The fact that what's going to happen to me when I show up in a meeting like this? What's going to how is the white centeredness going to view me when I show up? And so I showed that. I said, look, the fact that you're in the room doing what you do at your level is a direct picture of you being brilliant. You deserve to be there, but you show up as you are. And so I think that. So I tell that story because it spoke volumes to me about how, and the story of the young girl you just mentioned. The fact that we have been so trained to dislike how God created us. We have been trained and taught that we are not enough if we're too dark skinned, if our hair is too natural. And, and I think about, the sacred text, we are God's workmanship, created for good works. We read that. We quote that, but we spiritualize it.
Or do we really believe it?
Or do we believe it? So I'm created for good works in the spirit. My anointing makes me good. I can know if I can speak in tongues, I'm good. If I can shout, all the deep spirit, but no, since you were created, God made you, fashioned you with your dark skin, nappy hair, curly hair, straight hair, long hair, no hair, whatever. However God made you. You are designed by God for good works, and we have to begin to embrace that and reinforce that in the black church. However you look, however tall you are, short you are, if you got 4 teeth left, I don't care. How God made you, you are created for good works, and we got to appreciate and know that blackness is good.
It is good, right, and perfect, right? I'm black and beautiful. Not but. See, depending on what translation you read, your point. That's why it's important what we're preaching and how we're preaching is so critical. Because by reading black but beautiful, that's the equivalent to, I don't know, sure, now I want to put you in. I'm going to put you in it for a minute. I don't know if you ever experienced this. You cute to be a dark girl.
Oh, my God.
Yes, yeah. Right?
Yeah.
Because that's saying something totally different than you're pretty. Yeah. You're cute. You understand what I'm saying?
Right.
So that's what matters. If I read, I'm black but beautiful. No. Mm-mm. And.
Yes.
It's not because, it's not an exception. Mm-hmm. And I think nuance things, that ain't a nuance. Deciding what translation you read matters so much, particularly if you are a pastor, because you are for many the authority on the text.
100%.
Yeah, so that's why it's so important to do that, and I think that will, if we can get that, a lot of what we can't talk about all of it obviously, but what we've talked about today, I think. Begins the process. So if I travel outside of America and I go to another country and I see blackness showing up a different way, I'm not going to demonize it automatically. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. My lens or my bent or my worldview should be, oh man, that's my brother and my sister. I know we got something coming. Go figure out what that is. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right? That needs to be our first thought. And not because we good at tearing down. We owe them Africans this, that, and it goes both ways. I've heard I've heard stuff said to me from people who are, from different places, and we had to have a conversation. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But I get it. Some of that has to do with iconography. Oh, absolutely. Who controls that globally? Mm-hmm. What's put out in media globally? Mm-hmm. We have to. So that's what I mean by But now social media kind of helps us level that where you can see a different lens. Right. You don't have to stay in bondage to a Eurocentric worldview. Mm-hmm. You don't have to. Mm-hmm. And so I think, I think it's a way for us to kind of continue to look at the commonalities, kind of how we recenter our sacred text and how we preach it is so critically important. And then, like you said, just having conversations, sitting around talking about it. Right. And we used to do the African American Heritage Lecture Series. Were you here when we did that with Dr. Wright?
No, that's before me.
Before you came. And I love that at Friendship West because that is what he did so brilliantly. He was really able to get you to see and understand that you are part of a diasporic community. Mm-hmm. You're not a minority. Right. Even that language.
Oh, yes.
We're the majority in the world. Who the minority?
Right.
Not us.
Right.
So you see yourselves as I belong to a larger group of people. Mm-hmm. When I go to certain places where I'm going to see myself. There's more places you can go to see yourself than not see yourself when you travel outside of America, right? Mm-hmm. So I think the teaching has to be there. And I think, and that happens over time. Everybody doesn't catch it right away, right? And sometimes maybe an experience. It's the last thing I'll share because I know our time is winding up. I was watching a PBS special of 2 black women who are good friends. One of them had been starting to dig in, like, hey, I want to explore my African roots. I feel called to do this. Her other friend was like, we American, we black folks here. That's that, she was really downing her friend. So they decided to take a trip to Africa. So she said, I go. I was going because you want to go. Now, who you think came back toe up from the floor up and was just like I was all wrong? Yeah. Because she was able to, when they showed them going to Elmina Castle, that woman just lost it. Yeah. And so sometimes it's an experience. So it's also, I'm wondering how we also create experiences for people. Right. Teaching experiences, et cetera, that can help us to kind of strengthen that bond so that our natural response when we see a black person not like ourselves is not negative. Right. That we lean into the positive aspect of who they are.
Yeah. I know our time is up, but I do want to share this, that to your point, I think the black church in particular has a specific responsibility to teaching our history, to telling our story. Mm-hmm. because so many of us don't know, and we're seeing now in 2023 where they don't want our story
That's
told.
right. That's right.
And so we have to tell that story. We have to educate and empower our people. And lastly, I'll say this. I think in thesis is we have to be okay with centering blackness in the black church. It's okay.
It's okay.
It's okay.
In the black church, and by extension, in our lives individually and publicly.
Absolutely.
So, like, it just becomes and that's African. We live it.
Yeah.
It's not something we put on, take off, or hot. Wherever I go, I'm going to show up as my full, authentic self, whether you like it or not. Listen, thank you, Reverend Madison, for this great conversation. Pastor McGruder, we missed you. We knew you would have a lot to add to this conversation. Then you got to come back and do something else. So thank you for being here. Listen, don't forget, you can check us out. Season 3 has kicked off. Every Thursday, 12 noon, we rebroadcast at 7 o'clock Central Time. And you can catch us not just on YouTube. You can check us out on Amazon Music, Spotify, and other streaming platforms. And join us next week. We're going to have an even gooder conversation with Dr. Lester McCorn, who's the president of Clinton College, good friend of mine. We're going to talk about black labor, white wealth. Building communities of opportunities, which lends itself to probably much of what we're talking about now. We're going to talk about where that black wealth was extracted from, right? So it's going to be an amazing conversation next week. So make sure you tune in and join us. Thank you for dropping into the classroom. And check this out. You can also support us by buying a T-shirt, Fannie Lou's Classroom T-shirt. You can order that T-shirt by going to the Friendship West website, go to the Justice page, scroll down, you'll see Fannie Lou's Classroom. You can hit that link and buy a T-shirt. We appreciate your support. And again, if you want to help out with being on our team, just email flc@friendshipwest.org. Until next week, be blessed.
From the church to the